So my store manager index still loads. We haven't broken it. It's just that now it's modified. So instead of our database connection happening within the controller, it's happening from this file instead. But our web application's still working. So now let's go back to our unit test. If we try and run our unit test again, in my test class, I'll run this. Now our test failed, still giving us the same error. So we're close, we're almost there. Here's the last thing we have to do in our test. We have to create this mock object, and when we call the controller, we have to pass it the mock object. When we do that, our controller is then going to use rather than using the repository that talks to our database, it's going to use the fake repository instead. This one. So it won't try to connect the database, which means our error is going to go away. So we'll go back to our test file. Oops. So this is where we need to use mock. We're going to add a reference to the mock library. We're going to create a few variables so we don't have to repeat them. Now we're going to use our mock class. Now it doesn't know what this is. It's inside our models folder. So if I just add a reference to my models, now it knows what that is. The line turns blue. You notice it added that reference on line 10 using my music store model. Now, one of the things we have in our unit testing framework, Microsoft has a test initialize method. So if there's anything we want to run before every test, we can put it in there. So every time we run a test, we want to initialize our mock. So we're going to create an initialize method. So this will always run first. We don't even have to call it. Because it says test initialize, this always happens first. Now we want to pass the mock to the controller. Oops. Then we can actually get rid of this line. We don't need to create the controller. The controller gets created in the test initialize method every time automatically. So this will always run before any method. So now we're calling the controller, but we're passing a mock object to it. So it won't try and connect to the database. That should get rid of the error that we've been getting all along. So now if we build and run this test one more time, hoping it should pass. So it finally passes because now we're using the controller. But because we're handing this mock object over here, it doesn't try to connect to our database anymore. It knows we're working with fake data, so we don't need the database. Now I should still refresh my browser and make sure we didn't break. That the web page that uses this version with the database is still functioning. So if I reload here, right, my web, so the index method still works on the web, it still uses the database. But now our unit test can run and it doesn't use the database. So the controller's got two versions. When you don't give me anything, I'm using the database. If you give me a mock object, I know I'm just going to use the mock and I'm not going to bother connecting to the database. So it can run in either one of these two paths. So we've got one successful unit test now that tells us whether it actually loads a view. Right, so our result is no longer null here. We actually get a view back, but our method doesn't bother trying to use the database. So that's one unit test. That's useful. What we'll want to test, that's probably not all we should test though. Right? So we want to make sure a couple things when we call index. One, we want to make sure we get a view back when we now have a successful test for that. What else should we test on our index view? Does it matter what's actually in the view that we get back? Or so long as we get a view, we're good? Right, on the web side of things, what do we see in this view? What should be returned along with the view? Daniel? Yeah, we want to see the list of albums. So this is not a bad first test, but we probably want another test that says that our view contains a list of albums. It's not just enough we get a page. We want to make sure the page has got the right kind of data in it. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break here. I will push my code up to GitHub. And then we're going to write another unit test on our index method to also make sure that this gives us a list of albums. And if we can do that, we can then maybe try unit testing some of the other methods in our controller.